which is that federal law that applies to every state in the country that limits what all debt collectors, whether it's your bank's in-house collection department or a contracted collection agency or even a debt purchaser, must adhere to, or they could be subject to both civil and criminal penalties. And more importantly, if you can prove that they have violated the Federal Fair Debt Collection Practices Act in court, they could lose the right to collect on your debt entirely. Personally, while I was receiving 5, 6, sometimes 7 calls from collection agents a day, I was really happy to get this piece of paper, informing me of my rights as a borrower even while I was delinquent in my accounts. It told me the hours that they were not allowed to call me outside of. It told me that they weren't allowed to threaten me or harass me. All of that urban legend of the terrors of talking to debt collectors, which I certainly still suffered from at the beginning of my journey, before I started to see the scripts that they were all working from and realize that they were treating it like a business, and so could I. It was relieving and to a large extent empowering to realize that there were laws that protected me as a consumer. Naturally, I wanted to know as much as possible, so I looked up the entire act. I'm not going to share it all with you in full detail here. It would be too cumbersome, but I am going to go through some major points, which I think you'll be happy to hear about all of them. There is a full printing of the act on the Federal Trade Commission website and a nice summary on the Federal Reserve website. But for now, let's just go through some of the major points of the Federal Fair Debt Collection Practices Act that protect you by limiting what a debt collector is legally allowed to do when trying to collect your debt. To begin with, a debt collector is not allowed to discuss your debt with anyone other than you. They're not allowed to call up your family members and talk about your debt, or your employer and talk about your debt. They are allowed to make one phone call to people associated with you. They can call a friend one time. They can call your employer one time. And the only thing they are allowed to do on that one phone call is confirm your location. They can give an address and have it confirmed. They can give a phone number and have it confirmed. They are not allowed to mention that you are in debt or how much you are in debt. They're not even allowed to mention that they're calling from a debt collection agency, such that the person on the phone could infer from that you are in debt. They are not allowed to talk to anybody else in your world about your debt or that the debt even exists. And after that one phone call, they're done. So they're not allowed to harass your family or friends or employers, even if they don't talk about your debt. So those old fears of friends, family, employers being hounded by debt collectors talking about the fact that you're in debt, they are not legally allowed to do. And if they do, they can lose the right to collect on your debt entirely. And in some cases, even lose their license in their business, so most will not do it. They are, of course, allowed to call you repeatedly and to talk about your debt with you. Though if you tell them not to call you at work, they must abide by that and stop calling you at work. In fact, if you tell them not to call you at all, they must abide by that and can then only resort to communicating with you by mail. And as long as we're talking about communicating by mail, in the same way that on a phone call with anybody else, they're not allowed to indicate that they even work for a debt collector, any mail that they send to your family or friends can also not indicate that they work for a debt collector or that it's about trying to collect a debt. It can only ask to confirm contact information for you, which is why many debt collecting agencies have very innocuous names. I encountered things like recovery services and that kind of stuff, so that they can send out their mail on their letterhead and never be in violation of this law that says they are not allowed to identify themselves as a debt collector to anybody but you. They're also not allowed to send mail that looks like it could be from any other official government agency or pretend to be anybody but who they actually are. So I'm sure you've all seen things like some company that wants you to pay a fee for a service, and they send you a document that looks like it's a really official government document with all the little footnotes and everything, and you think, oh my gosh, this is the government asking me for $75 without really knowing why I have to send it. A lot of people send letters like that to try and get money out of people for services by manipulating them with the form of the letter itself. Debt collectors are precluded precluded by law from doing that. And at the same time, if you are ever on the phone with them and ask them for their identity and the name of their company and their address and phone number, they must provide you with the truth. They have to tell you their legal name and the name of their company and their real address and phone number. They cannot hide behind pseudonyms or obscurity. They're also not allowed to send a fake legal summons. You can imagine the reason that it was codified that a debt collector is not allowed to send a fake legal summons is that many debt collectors prior to it being enacted were sending fake legal summonses, making it look like a borrower was about to be sued to induce them to make a settlement on their debt. That is illegal. They're not allowed to harass you. They're not allowed to curse at you. They're not allowed to berate you. They're not allowed to publicly harass you or publish intimidations about you being in debt. This is a long list of protections for you being a debtor who is behind on payments. They obviously can't commit violence on you. Committing violence on you would be a crime. They can't even threaten violence on you. They can't even mention violence on you. They also can't threaten consequences. They can't say, pay or I'm going to take your house away. Pay or I'm going to garnish your bank account. They can only say that those things have happened if they are actually happening and they have the legal right to do so, or mention that it is possible in you being behind on debt, but not specifically say, pay now or I'm taking your home. And this is a really good one. They are not allowed to ever say that they can collect more than you actually owe, or ever collect more than you actually owe. Which means while they may say if this goes to a lawsuit, you could be liable for legal fees, which is true, they can't say, well, you owe $20,000 now, but if you don't pay it and I sue you, you might owe $40,000 or $60,000 later. That's not true and illegal for them to use as an intimidation tactic to get you to pay. You will never be liable in the collection of a debt, even at the far end of the day, for more than you actually owe, plus legally applicable fees. Here are laws that actually specifically protect you when you are behind on your debt and trying to negotiate a settlement on your debt. One of the inferences you can make from this, again, is to start eliminating that wrongness of being in debt or even being in arrears on your debt. If laws exist that specifically address what debt collectors can and can't do when dealing with you as a person who is behind on their debt, we must be able to infer that being behind on your debt is legal and therefore okay within the scope of you being able to do whatever is legal and in your best interests. Here are laws that actually specifically protect you when you are behind on your debt and trying to negotiate a settlement on your debt. So, how does hearing all of that make you feel? I hope it starts to really dispel a lot of those urban legend fears, number 3 fear of debt settlement, of talking to debt collectors.